It's day 2 of Norway Chess, and the game I'm looking at today is between Veselin Topalov with white and Vishy Anand with black. Now Vishy's already off to a fantastic start. He beat Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in the first round. Now I didn't cover that one. There are tons of good coverages of the game though. Chess Base India did one, Hikaru did one, so do check them out if you missed it. This one today, Vishy's looking to carry on where he left off with a victory, but he's got black, and we saw a razor sharp opening here, but then the unexpected happened just when we thought it was heading towards a draw. So let's see what happened here. We had d4 here from Veselin, Vishy went d5, pawn c4, and now Vishy goes for the Queen's Gambit accepted. He takes that pawn. Pawn e4 now from Topalov, and this is the sharpest way to play. You don't go pawn e3 or knight f3, you set up the big centre here. Now white can already start undermining with things like e5, but Vishy went pawn to b5 here, another very sharp way to play. He's trying to hold on to the pawn, but white starts undermining with pawn to a4. So Vishy goes c6, holding his pawn chain, and you can now start with the b3 stuff, then e5 gets very sharp, but instead Topalov goes knight to c3, again pressuring b5, and defending with a6 is no good. There's a pin down here against the black rook, so instead pawn b4 was played. You kick on now, you gain time against the knight. What is white playing at? Well, now the c4 pawn is weak by that transaction of moves. So bishop a6 holds the pawn, and now you can go knight to f3 here as white, hold your d pawn, then prepare to go queen c2, attack the pawn, whole other story. But Topalov goes queen c2 immediately, attacks that c4 pawn, but now he gives the pawn on d4. So knight f3 develops, kicks that queen back, and you don't want to come to c5 here, try and hold the pawn, then you're running into bishop e3. White's got a massive initiative and will be picking up that pawn in a moment. So the queen dropped back to d7 here. Now we had takes on c4, the bishop took, queen took back, and pawn e6 from Vishy. So black's actually a pawn up here, but what we'll see is that it's very difficult to actually hold on to this pawn. So we had bishop e3 from Toppy, knight to f6, knight b to d2, now bishop e7, both players castled the king, and this rook came to the d-file. And here we can really see the black problems already. How do you actually develop this knight into the game? The queen's covering a6, it can't come to c6, it can't come to d7. There's a threat to move this knight to b3 and then sit some pieces on c5. So that's why Vishy plays a very practical move here. He just chucks that c-pawn, gives it back to white, Toppy takes that one. Now he goes rook to c8. So yes, he's given the pawn back, but at least he can start activating his pieces. And he's also giving this second pawn when he plays like this, but that isn't taken straight away, as we'll see. So first knight b3 was played, covers the bishop, also opens the rook to attack the queen. So queen c7 was now played. Now the bishop is pinned to the queen, but you can't go and take this pawn with the queen, or then you're running into knight a6. That's actually winning a piece on c5. So that's why queen b5 was played, breaks the pin, doesn't run into that knight move. Now when you play like this, you are actually letting black take this pawn on e4, but it's just way too dangerous. After takes on e7, queen takes, simply rook a to c1. Again, you've got massive problems actually developing this knight into the game. And black's got all of the same problems. If we run it back here, after queen b5, say you tried to hold on to that pawn with a5, once again, rook a to c1 is a massive problem. You're just not developed. So that's why Vishy now plays pawn a6. He kicks the queen into b4. This time Topalov does take, because there's no knight a6 move, the pawn's now covered that square. But at least with this whole way of playing, Vishy now gets knight c6. He's actually a pawn down here, but he's going to get lots of pressure down that b-file in compensation. So the queen dropped all the way back to e1, covers that e4 pawn. This rook came to the b-file, pressures the knight. So we had captures on e7, the queen recaptured, and now you don't actually have to defend it. you can play this amazing rook a to c1 move, because if black takes your knight, then you can go knight to d4. You hit this rook and you hit this knight here twice now with rook and knight. You can't take on d4 because of this pin, back rank issues, and if you try and drop the rook back to defend the knight, then you're running into a5. So very tactical, not easy to see, but that was the best move, rook a to c1 in this position here, ignoring the threat, but instead Topalov defended, but now Anand really starts to take over the game. It's equal still, but he gets a ton of pressure. So queen b4 comes onto the queen side. Queen e2 activates, looks at that a6 pawn. Anand now hops in with his knight. It's forced to actually take that one off. The queen recaptures, and now if you jump in and take this pawn, which didn't happen, then rook c2 is really dangerous. You're invading on the 7th. Looks very scary for white, despite being 2 pawns up. So that a6 pawn wasn't captured. b3 was played instead. So Toppy's trying to just hold tight here, use this knight to hold the 2 pawns, but he is getting a bit tied up here. But you can't go rook c2 immediately. Then white can actually challenge the file here, and if you play the most natural looking move on the board, double the rooks on the file, well, white can actually take, the rook recaptures, and then you can move this knight away. Knight f1's a good move, or you can go knight to f3, but the whole point is you're opening the rook and there's back rank problems. So say black takes here, white takes here, you have to cover the back rank, and now white has simplified, simply a pawn up, doing a lot better. So that's why Vishy didn't invade with the rook on the 2nd immediately. He held this one back, he went pawn h6, covered that back rank first, and now Toppy went rook to a2, covers that invasion square. Anand now goes a5, saves that pawn, clamps on the backwards b pawn, pawn h3 from Toppy, always give your king luft, queen b4, queen e1 now from Topalov, and we can really see the pressure here now on the white position, despite being a pawn up. So the rook now came to c3, invading, pressuring the pawn, rook to b2 played. This rook came to the d file, and now more shuffling. e5 was actually best here, but this rook came across, and now it allows Anand to get knight to d7. This rook's now left the d file. If it was still on the d file, you could now move this knight away, say to f3, and this would be a nasty pin of knight against rook. But now that the rook's left the file, this knight hits d7, queen e2 was played, and after rook b8, rook d1, it spins into c5 here. Huge pressure now on the white position, and Topalov is getting very low of time. So he brings this rook back to the b1 square, he's shuffling his pieces, and already Anand could crash through here, but instead he keeps it complicated. He plays rook to d3, now pawn e5 played finally. The rook hopped back to d5, pressures that pawn, and this knight finally reactivates into the game. So Topalov accepts, he's giving a pawn back here, but he's trying to liquidate pieces. So Anand takes on d1, the queen recaptures there, and now Anand crashes through, he takes on a4, using that pin against the rook. Rook a1 was now played, pressures the knight, so it hopped into c3, hitting that queen, and this is where the twist occurred. Topalov had been getting lower and lower and lower on time, and you don't get increments before move 40. You do get 10 seconds after move 40. So in this position here, he slams down queen d6, but just outside of time control, he flags, he loses on time. So Anand has now won 2 classical games in a row. He's picking up where he left off from the Superbet Chess Classic. Awesome stuff from Anand. Really interesting to see where he can go in this tournament. If you enjoyed this game and want to see another epic chess game, click here. Thanks very much for watching. See you soon.